We went to the royal greenhouses, I tell my mother on the phone. In Belgium? I thought Belgium was a democracy, she says. It is a democracy, mother, in the same way the United Kingdom is a democracy. Well, she says, in great doubt. I never knew that. I'm reading texts from my new collection, my one and only collection, which is called the Supercargo's Magazine for Your Consideration. And I'm reading a text that I originally published on the Supercargo blog in 2015. This text is about a visit to the royal greenhouses in Laeken, just outside of Brussels. But I'm not in Brussels, I'm in Gothenburg, and even if I were in Brussels, I couldn't get into the palace grounds at this time of the year because they're only open for 2 weeks in May. So I've taken you to Gothenburg, Botanical Gardens, and as I discovered a moment ago coming in, the old greenhouses here are completely surrounded by a building site because they're under renovation. But we have this behind me, which is the newest addition to the Botanical Gardens greenhouses. So that's what's in the backdrop here. We went to the royal greenhouses, I tell my mother on the phone. In Belgium? I thought Belgium was a democracy, she says. It is a democracy, mother, in the same way the United Kingdom is a democracy. I stress the word kingdom. Well, she says, in great doubt. I never knew that. The royal greenhouses are a big thing here in Belgium. However, they are only open to visitors for a couple of weeks each spring. They occupy a large part of the gardens of the royal palace at Laeken, to the north of the old city. And you get to them on the number 53 bus, alighting at the stop called Serre Royal. That translates as royal greenhouses. Makes sense. Now, the Belgians are generally pro-royal. In fact, I've been told that the Belgian royal family are the only true Belgian national icon, that without them, Belgium would quickly dissolve into its constituent parts, Flanders, Wallonia. Consequently, visiting the royal greenhouses seems to be a way for Belgians to affirm their commitment to the head of state and to national unity. It is also not overstating the case to say that there is considerable social pressure on foreigners living in Brussels to pay a visit too. So Mrs. SC and I bowed to that pressure and took the opportunity of a sunny May day to make our pilgrimage. It was crowded with local tourists and foreigners. I heard Italian and Spanish, English and Swedish, and not just from us, Polish, Japanese and Chinese, also Dutch, French and German, of course. It felt like there were thousands of people, though I think that was partly an impression caused by a restricted route and a large number of narrow doors. We moved in line and very slowly, and there was also a great deal of standing around and not moving. Perhaps because the greenhouses are only open for this very short window every year, the people responsible, and I'm going to blame the Belgian royals, they haven't wanted to waste their money on benches. I'm sure there were a few more, but I can only remember seeing and actually sitting on 2. Also, if there was any place of refreshment anywhere inside the gardens, it was well concealed. There were a couple of vans parked in the road outside the royal palace doing a brisk trade in hot dogs and waffles and ice cream and bottled water, but in the grounds, nada. The royal shop was selling watering cans, but no water. There was, however, a Red Cross post, so I suppose people who collapsed would be attended to. Perhaps helped off the palace grounds to one of the vending vans. There were also very large numbers of children, and despite all the standing around, they were amazingly well behaved and cheerful. Or if not cheerful, then resigned, but not whiny. I was impressed. So what was so special about the royal gardens? It wasn't the plants. The excuse for only opening for 2 weeks in the spring is, this is when the flowers are in bloom. Well, that doesn't wash. As anyone will know who's visited open year-round greenhouses in botanical gardens, there's usually something blooming most months of the year. There's always something of interest to see, even if it hasn't got flowers. I guess these greenhouses were originally set up as botanical greenhouses. In fact, a little leaflet we bought suggested exactly this. At least one of the greenhouses was built specifically to hold plants brought from the Belgian Congo. It was unsuccessful and the plants died. Nowadays, the collection seems to consist very largely of azaleas and geraniums. There are a number of palm trees, ferns, and a few pitcher plants too. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but really there were a hell of a lot of azaleas and geraniums. And they were pretty, impressive even, by virtue of being so many. But seriously, you can see something similar in any well-stocked garden centre. And do azaleas really need to be raised in greenhouses? There's a whole little rocky azalea valley, absolutely not under glass, that is part of Slottsskogen Park, back home in Gothenburg. It's a riot of colour when the azalea bushes bloom, and Gothenburg is several hundred kilometres closer to the Arctic Circle than Brussels. However, the greenhouses themselves are quite something. They cover an area of 2.5 hectares or 270,000 square feet. Thank you, Wikipedia. And are constructed with a decorative cast iron frame and glass panels. They were built between 1874 and 1895 on the orders of King Leopold II. Leopold was the notorious king of the Belgians, who commissioned expeditions to and then exploited the wealth of the Congo basin, treating the inhabitants as his slaves. The royal greenhouses are presumably where some of his Congo money went. I'm going to make a wild guess here. Leopold was about 20 years old in 1851. That was when the great cast iron and plate glass Crystal Palace was opened for the Great Exhibition in London. My guess is that Leopold saw it and was impressed by it and thought, I want to get me one of those, or the contemporary francophone equivalent. And when he had the money and the opportunity, he decided he would do better. He would surpass it. And if so, I think that he achieved his goal. Of course, it's not all greenhouses. There are orangeries too, and ornamental ponds, and cherry trees, and a pagoda, and distant attractive views of Brussels across the river, which is actually the great Brussels-Charleroi Canal. According to Wikipedia, which appears to be citing an article in the Daily Telegraph, the former king of the Belgians, Albert II, who abdicated in 2013, lives with his wife in a building in the grounds, while current King Philippe and his queen live in the main Laeken palace. I wonder what they do during these 2 weeks when the hoi polloi get to traipse around their greenhouses. Probably they take a vacation in a far-off place, but I'd like to imagine they're really still in the palace, peeking out at the crowds and longing for a time when the great gates to the palace grounds shut and they can once again walk in peace through their greenhouse empire.
Thank you for sitting through the video thus far. I filmed all that you've looked at now yesterday, and it was my first expedition out with the camera, and it wasn't until I got home that I realized it was overexposed. Now I do a belt and braces operation, so I had actually filmed myself 3 times in 3 separate spots, and all of them were overexposed. I obviously had set something wrong in the camera. Added to that, I had managed to switch off the recording device I was using, so the only sound I had available was the sound that the camera itself picked up. Okay, I did what I could with what I had. I hope it's enough, so next time I go out and about I will try to do better. I wanted to say something about Leopold II as a sort of footnote. His exploitation of Congo was conscious. He knew what he was doing, he just didn't care. At the same time, it has to be borne in mind, I think, that in our current modern pursuit of rare earths and minerals, we are also exploiting the Congo, perhaps not in quite the same way that Leopold did, but I'm not sure how clean our hands are, and maybe that should give us pause before we condemn him completely. That was what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you again later.